Yeah, no problem. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Mobilizing Support for People with Disabilities Who Have Experienced Sexual Violence. This is a webinar specifically geared towards considerations for people with disabilities. Welcome. Just some housekeeping notes before we get started. All attendees are muted, and you do have the option to turn on closed captions by looking at the bottom of your screen and selecting the arrow on the closed caption button, which will show subtitles. We do also have an American Sign Language interpreter with us today. So if you do need that feature or want to use that feature, you should be able to see the interpreter at the top of your screen. You can also pin the video if that is easier for you. We do encourage you to use the chat function to ask us any questions throughout the presentation. We will be fielding those and create some time at the end of the presentation to address those. The last thing we want to make sure to reference is that this is, sexual violence is a really heavy topic, right? And so we're here to learn about this topic and really talk about some ways that we can get through that, right? And so we do have someone from a local rape crisis center, and she will be available to chat with anyone in the comments. If you want to private message her, her name is Megan Milburn. Is that correct?
Lauren Milburn.
Lauren
I'm putting
Milburn.
that in the chat right now too.
Okay, so thank you so much, Maggie, and away we go. Okay. My name is Tara Ahern, and I am the project director for the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance. I am also one of the co-chairs for Illinois Imagine Chicago and the 2020 AAPD Hearn Leadership Awardee. Timotheus, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Timotheus Gordon Jr., also known as TJ Gordon. And not only I am an autistic self-advocate and research associate at University of Illinois at Chicago's Institute on Disability and Human Development. I am also a co-founder of Chicagoland Disabled People of Color Coalition.
Wonderful, thank you. We're going to start out with a poll. We just want to see who's here today. I know this webinar is considerations for people with disabilities, but we do want to acknowledge that we might have other folks in the room. So tell us who is here today. Let's celebrate. Are you a person with a disability, from a disability service agency, a rape crisis center? Maybe you're a family member or a friend or an ally. So please select your option in the poll.
Tara, this is Christine. If I may interrupt, your PowerPoint presentation does not seem to be forwarding.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
All right.
Thank you so much for that. Are you seeing?
Thank
you.
Okay,
great. Thank you. I'm glad we caught that early on. Okay, Maggie. All right. So it looks like we have, interesting. Okay, so we have a majority of folks from disability service agencies. So hopefully hopefully some of you who are working with agencies are supporting individuals with disabilities, and maybe they're on with you today, or maybe they will watch this recording in the future. Just want to put that out there that we will be sending out today's recording as well as the PowerPoint, which will have live links to some of the resources. Okay, it looks like we have a lot of allies here today too. Today's objectives are plentiful. We are going to discuss identity, healthy sexuality, and relationships, such an important topic. Recognize the intersection of disability and sexual violence and its impact on survivors. Next, we'll review ways to access services and supports and examine resources that are available. This presentation series, this webinar series, is made possible by the American Association of People with Disabilities Hearn Leadership Award Project. 2020. So I won an award earlier this year, and my award project is really to explore and engage survivors with disabilities, collaborate with rape crisis centers, and do some trainings and the webinars that you're on, the webinar that you're on today, and a bunch of others, in the hopes of improving services, policies, and opportunities for people with disabilities. So this is number 4 of 9 events that we are hosting, and we're really excited to have you all here with us. Okay, TJ, why don't you tell us what our first objective is?
Sure thing.
Mhm.
For the first objective, we will talk more about discussing identity and examples of what it means to have a healthy sexuality and relationships as a person with a disability. So we like to view self-advocacy in anything, whether it is advocacy for a healthy relationship or advocacy in getting the resources that you need in coping with being a survivor of sexual violence, which we'll get into later, or anything self-advocacy related. It's a puzzle piece of knowing who, what, when, where, how, and why. So in this instance for sexuality and relationships, self-advocacy could look like who are you dating, or who would you like to pursue a relationship with?
Mhm.
What does the person have in common? Where do you know this person from, or where are they located? When would the person want to pursue their relationship? And what are the reasons of um, pursuing a relationship, or how can they express love towards each other? It can also apply to advocacy in getting the services that you need, as well as where to go for resources if you're a survivor. Why do you think it's important to get those resources, and how can you get the resources as well?
Right. Yeah.
Because
So
mhm.
yeah, go on, TJ. Sorry. Sorry to
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so this worksheet that you see on the right hand of your screen. It is a really it's a worksheet that we use at the Alliance to really go through what self-advocacy is, and we like to present it as if it's a puzzle. So once you know the pieces of the puzzle, you can advocate wherever and whenever, right? And so we know that advocacy means speaking up and speaking out for yourself or other people who maybe can't or don't know how to speak up yet. Okay, and so this is a resource that we have on our website, which you can access at any time. And just to make a little plug, the Alliance does do some trainings and presentations for self-advocates, people with disabilities, to learn about advocacy. We also do staff training as well. Okay, TJ, talk to us about identity. This is really important. Something we don't often get to learn about, especially in the DD world, right? The developmental disabilities world.
Yes, and I think the reason why we don't get to learn about gender and sexuality in the disability world, because we usually think of gender and sexuality as just two things. Gender is either male or female, and sexuality is just one thing usually, which is dating somebody from a different gender. But in fact, just like disability has many identities, you can have many forms of disability. You can also have many forms of sexual orientation, how you express your gender, or how you identify your identity as well. And so the picture on your right is a diagram of a person, and it shows examples of gender identity, sexual orientation, gender expression, and biological sex. What we mean by biological sex is the sex that you are born with based on the body parts that you have, which in the medical field is usually male or female, but it could also be intersex, where you may have both characteristics of male and female too. Gender identity doesn't have to match your biological sex. Some people are comfortable with um, the sex they assigned at birth. Other could feel that they're more male, even though their biological identity is different. They may feel that they could do more expressions of their gender not that is not according to not only their biological sex but also their expectation of their sex as well. And so the gender identity and expression is vast, and a person could present themselves however they want. Or some people could express themselves what they call androgynous, where they could, or non-binary, also they call it, where they could just be themselves and they don't have to look like a particular gender. And lastly, sexual orientation. What we mean by sexual orientation is who are you attracted to sexually. Some people are attracted to different genders or heterosexual. Others prefer person of the same sex, or some people may like people with various gender identity. All those things are okay. There's no right or wrong ways to express yourselves, as long as you do it legally, of course.
Right. Thanks for that. Yeah, and I think this is really helpful to have just a foundation of when we talk about identity, there's many ways that we identify, right? And so obviously what our gender is, who we want to date, but then we have another layer of disability, right? And so when we think about disability identity, what does that mean? That might be different for everyone. It's sort of like, there's spectrums of disability, but then there's ways that we feel comfortable identifying. I am a woman, a cisgender woman with many disabilities. I'm also a survivor of sexual violence, right? So that's another thing that I identify with. And so these are just kind of getting us in a comfort space of where we can have meaningful conversations about this. And just to put another note out there, that people with disabilities, especially developmental disabilities, aren't often privy to this information, right? So a lack of sex ed and a lack of conversations about identity are really a challenge in our service delivery system. And we want to be thoughtful about how we present this information to the people we serve, and also checking our own internal biases about what we're bringing to the table, right? Our own personal values that may not align with many of the things that we just talked about. And really being mindful that, this is not a place for us as staff to insert our beliefs, right? It really is up to an individual with disabilities that we serve to have their own opinions and their own beliefs. And like TJ said, as long as things are legal, like we want to allow people to explore and to really think about these things and what identities they identify with.
Hmm.
TJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's on these slides, if you would?
I would definitely do so. And what I'm about to read off right now is a few statistics on gender, sexuality, and disability that people may not know. For instance, did you know that 74% of people with developmental disabilities do not have knowledge of LGBTQ plus issues or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, queer, and other sexualities and genders in the wide spectrum that we discussed earlier, and that 70% have shown to have negative attitudes towards individuals who identify themselves as being in the LGBTQ plus community. Part of the reason that um, people have biases it for those with developmental disabilities or may not have knowledge, it really comes from the knowledge that they're exposed to. They may receive information of sexuality from the place they worship at, wherever faith they choose to follow, or from family members that believe in only one type of way to look at gender and sexuality, and that gets passed on to people with disabilities that uh, who express those similar attitudes towards people who think differently about sexuality and gender. So it really boils down to lack of information. And Tara also mentioned the myths surrounding what sexuality and gender looks like in society. Also, many people with developmental disabilities who identify as LGBTQ plus have difficulty accepting their identity, and from personal experience and also from what I have seen, people with developmental disabilities may not have the support that they have from family, friends, staff, and even people within the LGBTQ plus community who may not care or know about disabilities. So it's tough if you don't have the resource or the connections. And lastly, many staff supporting people with developmental disabilities do not feel comfortable or equipped in discussing sexuality. And once again, it goes back to the lack of information that the staff may have received about sexuality, or maybe they um, think of only one way to look at sexuality. And Tara, if you like to chime in on that more, you may
Yeah.
do so.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate your comments about, the LGBTQ plus community. I think that, when we have spaces that are kind of separate from each other, especially in the advocacy world, right? Even within social justice movements, like Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ plus, the disability rights movement, they're all sort of siloed, right? Whether it's through funding or just issues that are specific. We see that many spaces are inaccessible for people with disabilities. We saw that 4 years ago with the women's rights marches, where meetings were being held in inaccessible spaces. Even some of the speakers were not able to get up on stages, and I think that that's definitely a challenge too. That disability is very common. 1 in 4 people has a disability. Everyone knows someone, many someones that have disabilities. And so I think that as a society, we need to get to a place where disability is just one more thing that makes us unique, right? And that the world around us is created for the benefit of the most people. That, ramps help everyone, elevators help
Yes.
everyone, universal
Hmm.
design helps everyone, readability makes it easy for everybody to read something. And disability is a group that you can join at any time. Most of us in our lifetime will become disabled, whether it's eyesight or things that happen to us when we get older. It's just a reality, right? And so I think that this is something we definitely want to focus on and think about. Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And to add on to the sorrowing that Tara mentioned, we also had to remind ourselves that disability connects with all aspects of life, not just disability connects with race, disability connects with
Yeah.
sexuality, disability connects with how much money you make or where you come from. All those things are connected. So when we discuss things in the disability community, especially um, disability and sexuality, we must keep in mind that we should think of all these things together like a puzzle,
Hmm.
a whole puzzle, not pieces of a puzzle.
Hmm.
And there are two other things we would like to note about disability and sexuality. For instance, many people assume people with developmental disabilities are asexual. It goes back to the myth of sexuality and disability. People assume that because people with disabilities do not think like people without disabilities, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
that they cannot express their sexuality. But we are human, of course. We express sexualities just like anybody else. We may express it differently because of how we process things or how we function in the world. Also, did you know that suicide and mental health issues are seen more commonly in LGBTQ plus youth than heterosexual youth? Which actually, while it is a scary statistic, there are possible reasons why we see suicide mental health issues come about more often in the LGBTQ plus community, especially among youth, because they get bullied
Mm-hmm.
a lot for their sexuality. They get bullied because they present their gender differently than what people expect them to do, on top of the lack of support they get from friends, family, and the places that they go, as well as if you add, I mean, we could talk about it in another discussion, but if you add class and race to it, it gets more
Complicated, right?
challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I'm going to keep kind of harping on this, but I want to make sure that for the supporters and allies in the room, the digital room, that we're really aware of what we're bringing to the people we support around sexuality. I think that when we meet people who don't communicate with words, or uh, you know, have some challenges that we see day in and day out, it doesn't really negate the fact that adult bodies crave adult things, right? Human sexuality is embedded into our our systems or our bodies, and those bodies, want certain things. And so a part of this conversation is really getting at the importance of educating people, whether it's ourselves or the people we support, about their rights as sexual beings, but also from a prevention standpoint, that when people are empowered and aware of things, and just know more about it's kind of like a feast, right? There's a lot on the table, and we want to know what's there so we can make decisions about what we like and don't like. So that's okay. And it is scary as someone who, the liability and guardian fears and just policies that really aren't fleshed out enough in our agencies. I think those are things that we can work on. And we're going to talk more about that on the webinar on December 15th. So I would encourage anyone who is wanting to dig deeper into some of these topics to come back for that. But let's keep going. So TJ, tell us a little more about internal bias and ableism, and maybe how race and gender and sort of like all of these things come together.
Mm-hmm. There's so many things to cover, but I understand it's a short period of time, so I'll do my best to make it brief. But the how we view disability and sexuality, it really comes from how we form our beliefs about people with disabilities and sexuality from childhood, or even from where you come from, or where you work, or who you hang around with. And there are so many societal beliefs about disability and sexuality. Some are positive, some are negative. And it's not just people that do not have apparent disabilities have certain biases and ableism. We ourselves have our own personal beliefs and biases too, that is rooted in what we have learned from our backgrounds. For instance, when people think of disability in Black and Brown communities, where I from, for instance, they think people with disabilities should not do anything. They should just, get the government check and they'll be all right. They should not aspire to be anything, or it will be a sin for somebody with a disability to pursue passions in life, even passions in exploring their sexuality, because it will ruin our quote unquote innocence. And that's a one example of how we as people with disabilities, or we as people in general, may have our own beliefs and biases on sexuality and disability that could shape our own thinking, but may also um, showcase where we try to advocate for others. We may um, expose our biases to the people we actually try to advocate for. Tari, would you like to elaborate more
Sure.
on the biases?
Yeah, I think that biases, we're all working with them, right? It is what it is, and I think that we got to really sort of check ourselves and acknowledge that we all have them, and think more strategically about how we can dismantle some of this, especially when it comes to ableism, which is defined as a form of discrimination and the false idea that disabled people are by default inferior, when in truth, disability is just another way for a mind and body to be. This goes back in history to the beginning of our civilization and the charity model, and sort of like our society thinking we need to deal with people, hide them away, right? And then kind of coming through to the medical model, which is sort of the basis of here, the disability is a result of genetics or science or malpractice or something like that, and moving through to more of a social model and a civil rights model now, where disability is one of many things that makes us interesting. And ableism is something that happens in the world in general, but it's also something that happens in the disability community, right? As a disabled person myself, I've had ableist views of what I can and can't do, or maybe some projections of what I think another person can or can't do. And I think the reason I say this is that none of us are perfect. We're all working on it, right? And I think part of that goes back to, as a child, what TJ said, there's certain perceptions of that come from our communities, our faith communities, our families, whatever race we are, whatever gender we are. So we are kind of receiving these messages, right? That what we can and can't do, or should or shouldn't do. And we have to really be conscious of that as we kind of explore our own identities. Okay, TJ, tell us more.
My favorite part of the presentation. So, building a foundation for healthy relationships and healthy sexuality. There are many key things to take away from when trying to build a foundation to pursue the most healthy and best relationships that you could form, whether it's a romantic relationship, a sexual relationship, or even a platonic relationship, whatever relationship you want to choose. One thing that is very important, we all have the right to sexuality and love. It is a human right. It is not a privilege. We all have the right to be loved and have sexual connections that we feel are comfortable to us. And also, those healthy relationships are essential for a full life where we have healthy relationships in any form. We don't feel as stressed and we can do more things, not only socially, but also it can help have a better life overall in our workplace, with family, with a lot of things in life. It is also important that it is okay to explore your gender and sexual identity. It is very important because the person that knows the identity the most should be you. And so, by all means, you should have the opportunity to explore what you like, what you don't like, or what you want to improve on in feeling more fulfilled in your sexual and gender identity aspiration. And one big key foundation, and we will keep talking about it throughout the presentation and webinar. Information is power. Information is key. When you get the accurate information on gender and sexual identity, not only it will empower yourself, it will also empower people around you. And that could help build stronger communities as well. So, would it be great if we all have the accurate information we need to live full and healthy lives in relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and just a note for the people on the webinar that are supporters, um, you know, I think disability is largely a culture of compliance where we have individuals, whether it's developmental or physical, people that have needs that they require support for. We're sort of, people are taught to be compliant, to ask for permission, uh, to do many things that other folks don't have to do. And I think, again, that's part of the way that our service delivery system is. And it's not right or wrong, but as people that are supporters, we have an opportunity to kind of shift that narrative and shift the way that we do things and ask people what it is that they want. And it might take a while. Learning about self-advocacy is something that is not necessarily natural for a lot of folks who haven't been allowed to think and do things on their own, right? And it is really important though that we are encouraging people to learn about what's available to them and explore things in a healthy way. And just to note that when we teach people about sexuality and healthy relationships, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to run out and do it. Odds are they might already be doing it and you don't know about it. Okay. So information really is the most powerful thing. And just from my experience of teaching sexuality classes for several years, sometimes individuals learn about this stuff and they're like, whoa, this is a lot of responsibility. I want to take things slow. I really want to make sure that I do it right, get to know a person, feel comfortable, and be prepared. And you know, that's a really important life lesson for folks. Okay, TJ.
Yes. And before we get into what a healthy relationship and healthy sexuality will look like, I would note there is a difference between complying and consent. Complying, I think Tara did a great example of explaining that we had to ask permission to do certain things, but we, as people with disabilities, we don't have to ask permission to pursue what we want to pursue in life, and that includes having relationships or having healthy sex. However, there is this thing called consent where you should ask your partner or partners how would they like to explore their sexuality, and those things should be mutually agreed upon. Those are, I believe, the differences between compliance and consent. And with that being said, let's dive into what are what are healthy relationships and healthy sexuality looks like. As far as healthy relationships, it is very important to set and establishing boundaries. It's good to set boundaries, period, in anything, but especially in healthy relationships because it lets people know the things that you and your partner or your partners agree to do and agree not to do, or agree not to disrespect. When boundaries are broken, it causes stress in relationships, and it will also lead into domestic and sexual violence. Therefore, it is very important to establish your boundaries in relationships early and often. There are also types of relationships that could be explored, and you could explore any type of relationship you want. There's again relationships within the LGBT plus community you could explore. You could explore relationships with different genders. You can have one partner. You can have many partners. You could choose to be just friends with the person or marry. Those things are up to you and your partner to explore. You also must, you should set values and morals in healthy relationships. I think values and morals will drive the type of relationships you want and the boundaries you want to set with people you are interested in. Without values and morals, I personally believe that your relationship may not work because people did not establish what type of values they want in relationship and the morals they want to establish. It doesn't have to be religious, but it should be something that everybody believes in that is um, beneficial, for lack of better words. Going into healthy sexuality, we want to be pleased. You have the right to pleasure. You have the right to express what makes you feel good and also to let people know what doesn't make you feel good or make other people feel good. And experiences are like a spectrum with healthy sexuality too. Some people may come into sexuality as a first timer. Others have special sexual experiences for a long time, and both are valid. Or some may not want to experience sexuality ever at all, and that is okay too. People with disabilities also have the right to explore healthy sexuality in the way that they see fit. It could be whether exploring how they express love to people, or if they want to explore how they want to be pleasured, especially in kink, which I will say that for another discussion. We will talk about that panel later. And communication with not only healthy sexuality but also healthy relationships are very key. We people have to communicate, what they want to explore, how they how their relationship could look like, establishing the boundaries and all the things that makes for a healthy sexuality relationships. Without communication, everything else is out the window.
Mhm. Okay.
And just like everyone else, people with developmental disabilities have the right to sexuality and sexual expression. And we will reiterate sexual expression that's within the legal definition. Don't go outside of it. We don't condone anything outside of the law, but if it's anything within um, the law, go for it. That's your business. We have the right to dignity and respect. Respect our choices we make in our sexual expression. It is also okay for us to own our sexuality, whatever our sexuality and gender expression is. We have the right to privacy, confidentiality, and the freedom of association. We have the right to not give everybody the details on our sexual lives. We have the right to be private if we choose. We don't have to talk about our sexualities, or we may talk about it in pieces, or we may tell the whole world what we do. That's our business. And we are also free to associate with who we want to associate with in figuring out our sexual journeys. And we have the right to sexual education that is reflective of their cultural, religious, and moral values. To paraphrase, we as people with disabilities, especially intellectual and developmental disabilities, should have the right to sexual education that benefit us, not only in our moral values or how we see the world, but also if we want our sexual education to reflect our religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs, that should be considered in our sexual education. If we want our sexual education to reflect our culture, our race, our ethnicity, that should be considered as well. It should not, it don't have, excuse me, it should not be left out in the mix when we ask for access for sexual education. People should consider all those values in sexual education. It should not be limited to the standard abstinence only or wait until marriage. Access to sexual education should be customized and beneficial to the person asking for the information.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I want to hit on here is privacy. If you're joining us and you live in maybe a congregate setting, such as a nursing home or a group home, or even a state operated developmental center, or maybe in a SILA, or maybe you live with your family, or hopefully you live on your own if that's what you want, sometimes privacy can be a real barrier. For folks that live in congregate settings, maybe they have a roommate, maybe they have staff coming in and out, maybe they're not able to lock their doors, right? These are things that can be really challenging for the folks that, for you, if you're here listening today, right? And for staff, this may be something that you begrudgingly have to comply with as a provider. And so I don't have all the solutions, but I will encourage everyone to, if you are a self-advocate, use advocacy as a tool for expressing yourself. And we're going to talk through some sexual education legislation that was passed this year that will hopefully get at some of this. But let's continue the conversation. So, sexual rights statement. TJ, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I might have to put my hands up for this as if I'm swearing to the statement. We as people with disabilities have the right, no, we as people with disabilities have body integrity, privacy, and personal choice respected, including the right to know how to protect oneself from disease, abuse, etc. We have the right to be free from sexual harassment, abuse, assault, and other forms of sexual violence. We have the right to explore and define our own sexuality, our sexual orientation, our gender identity, and sexual expression without judgment or discrimination. We have the right to decide whether or not we want to be sexually active and when we want to be sexually active. We have the right to choose our own sexual partners and have privacy and dignity related to dating and sexual intimacy. We have the right to have safe and pleasurable sexual experiences in our terms, in our own terms. We have the right to decide if we want to get married or not, where we want to get married, and who to marry. And when we decide to get married, having equality and equity in any marriage. We have the right to decide if we want children, and it's also okay if we don't want children. We have the right to decide where we want to have children, if we wish to have children, how many children we want, the spacing of children, or how to have a child, whether it's through sex, through medical means, or adoption, whatever means necessary. We have the right to have readily available and equal access to education and information about sex, safe and healthy sexual relationships, and reproductive health. We have the right to the highest attainable standard of sexual health. We want accurate information that fits the scientific definition of sexual health, and also fits to a universal understanding of healthy sexual health. We have, excuse me, we have the right to have an effective remedy for violations of fundamental rights. When our sexual and relationship rights gets violated, we do have the right to seek counsel or to seek the resources that we need to address the violation.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so our next objective is to recognize the intersection of disability and sexual violence and its impact on survivors. So we're going to do our next poll. If Maggie, if you could launch our poll, the question is, what is sexual violence? So the options are rape, incest, stalking, unwanted contact or sexting, intimate partner violence, child sexual abuse, trafficking and exploitation, or all of the above. Oh my goodness, yay. What a good, yes, all of the above. Thank you so much. So we do have 3% with rape, which is also a correct answer, right? Sexual violence is in fact an umbrella term. So sexual violence means all of the things that you see on your screen: rape, trafficking and exploitation, incest, child sexual abuse, stalking, harassment, intimate partner violence, and unwanted contact or sexting. So 3 cheers for all of you. We're going to talk through very quickly. I want to be conscious of time to make sure we have some space for question and answer. Sexual violence myths. So most assaults occur between strangers. We know that that is not true, especially for people with disabilities. A lot of individuals that we support, whether it's or people, whether it's yourself, most assaults occur between people that you know, right? So if you're disabled and you're not really accessing your community much, and the only people you see are paid staff, doctors, pace drivers, family members, that's where the assaults are occurring. There's another myth that males do not get assaulted. We know that that is not true. That you can tell a rapist by their appearance. That there are many false reports of rape. This is not accurate. So false reporting statistics for sexual violence are on par with any other felony crime. So keep that in mind. Sometimes there are instances of false reporting for many crimes, but again, those statistics are similar to other crimes. Once consent is given, it cannot be taken back. So we're going to talk through that in a few minutes. And victims are partly to blame for their assaults. We know that this is a huge myth that we encounter. This is something that is very pervasive in our society still. I could sit here and talk about this for days, right? Facts and figures: people with disabilities experience sexual violence more than 3 times higher than people without disabilities. And people with intellectual or developmental disabilities experience sexual violence more than 7 times higher than people without disabilities. The stats for women with disabilities are around 80%. So 80% of women with disabilities have experienced sexual violence at least one time in their life. The stats for men hover around 30 to 60%, depending on what reports you're looking at. And we do know that people aren't reporting as much, right? So reporting rates are very low. And this is what we know to be true. And then I will add that prosecution rates are less than 1%. So that makes things even more complicated. People with disabilities have increased risk of victimization. TJ touched on a lot of these points. Being reliant on support services for things that you need, whether it's someone coming into your home for services, maybe helping you with hygiene or getting in and out of your bed or wheelchair. Poverty is something that really increases the risk of victimization. Inaccessibility and isolation. And I would say that COVID is really sort of bringing this to the forefront, that people are more isolated than ever, right? Having to rely on folks to bring in food and things like that. Also devaluation and stigma. And lastly, discrimination. Some of the potential consequences of abuse are negative financial, physical, and social effects, such as difficulty seeking and maintaining employment. And this kind of goes back to the welfare model, right? Where we have people that are consistently dependent on systems because really at its base, we need healthcare. As a disabled person, I need insurance. I need to make sure I have my breathing machines. I need to make sure I can see the specialists that I need. And, if I need to maintain that level of healthcare, I might not be able to work as much as, or make as much money or get paid as much as I could because I need to maintain those benefits, right? Increased depression and low self-esteem and mental health concerns. TJ told us before about the high incidence of suicide and mental health challenges, increased poor health, and loss of independence. Some risk factors are lack of advocacy skills. We talked about this, being compliant, having to ask for permission to go to the bathroom, not being able to choose your outfits or what you eat in the morning, or not being able to, TJ and I talked about this too, that not many people with disabilities achieve high educational status, right? So people with disabilities in master's and PhD level classes are few and far between. And that speaks to the challenges of systems and educational institutions, right? And so lack of education and advocacy is a huge proponent of this, right? And we said people are socialized to be compliant. And really, a person's disability, if you can't physically get to safety, that makes you a target, okay? A lack of information on your rights and accessibility challenges. Perpetrators know this, right? We know that it's a perpetrator's fault. It's never our fault when we are sexually assaulted, no matter what anyone or society tells us, okay? Perpetrators know how to target and manipulate their victims. They're very good at it, and that's why they're successful. So keep all of this in mind. Some of the tactics used are resources used to maintain autonomy and independence are often controlled and exploited, such as medical equipment or mobility aids. So threatening to take away medical equipment or aids as a threat to a person, controlling their finances, isolating them from their friends and family, right? Medication withholding, access to services or social supports, and then access to the telephone or any communication devices where you may, be able to call for help. And lastly, grooming strategies. Again, perpetrators are very good at this. Sometimes they start slow and groom you and get you to be more comfortable to when they can isolate you and commit the crime, right? So again, just a reminder that it is always a perpetrator's fault. So we have a question of what is grooming? Ooh, What is grooming? TJ, do you want to take this one?
I will do my best to take.
Okay.
I'll do my best. I may not
Okay.
have the direct answer, but grooming is basically, especially in sexual violence
Mm-hmm.
situations, or even in like child abuse situations. Basically, you are uh, teaching the person how to be a part of whatever crime or things they doing to them. Like for instance, let's say in child abuse, you are grooming a child to take inappropriate pictures or dress inappropriately, or to commit sexual acts to people older than that person. It can also be in a similar situation with a person with a disability where you are teaching them to basically follow in the perpetrator's will,
Yeah, absolutely.
even
So
though, yes,
yeah, so
even though you
some
don't want to do it.
right, right. So it could start as a friendship or a professional relationship or even a family, right? So there's sort of those levels of trust that you're trying to build. And then, kind of moving into, I don't know, maybe favors or promises or, secrecy. So asking a person to keep things a secret, lots of compliments. It could even start as a romantic relationship and lots of manipulation and control. And so that's sort of grooming a person is sort of like breaking down their barriers so that you can access them more easily, right? And to make them think potentially that it's their fault. And we know again that that's not a person's fault. So some of the other barriers are a lack of sex ed, staff training, policies and protocols, and opportunities to explore sexuality. We referenced before that if you live in a group home or a congregate setting, such as a larger setting, that you might not have an opportunity to explore your sexuality. You might not ever be able to be alone. And we do see that people find, well, there's a will, there's a way, right? So, wanting to reference the history of Illinois House Bill 3299, which was passed this year, and yes, and is now referred to as Public Act 101 0506. So, this came about as a result of the voice of self advocates in the state of Illinois who said, enough's enough. We demand opportunities to learn about healthy sexuality and violence prevention, and we want to have policy in place that regulates that basically states that we can learn about this stuff, right? Yay to self advocates, absolutely. So this bill was passed with the support of the Guardianship and Advocacy Commission, and the legislative process included a lot of town hall meetings, committee hearings, and witness slips that were submitted to the state. There was a huge pushback by some disability service providers, and guardians and family members, which is just frustrating and really telling of kind of the state of affairs of where we are in terms of our own internal bias of how we think of the rights of people with disabilities in terms of sexuality. Okay. So you can view the bill. There is a link here, so I will encourage you, excuse me, to look through that. There's also some resources on the the Department of Human Services website that we're going to send out too. And I'm just going to go through these slides kind of quickly. So TJ touched on this before, so thanks TJ. You're ahead of the game. Consent is clear, coherent, willing, and ongoing. It's active, expressed through words and actions that create an understandable permission. It's never implied, and the absence of a no is not a yes. Okay, so if someone's not responding with words or yes, or sign language, or however they communicate yes, that is not consent. Okay, Silence, again, is not consent. I'm not sure, I don't know, maybe. That's not consent. It's coherent. So if you're incapacitated by drugs or alcohol, you can't give consent, okay? A person cannot make rational, reasonable decisions because she or he lacks the capacity to understand the who, what, where, when, why, or how of the situation. That kind of gets at, we talked about this yesterday in the disability service provider training, that, you know, consent capacity is something we really need to think about, especially for people with developmental disabilities. But again, if a person wants to be sexual, they're going to find a way. And so we need to be really flexible in understanding how we can support individuals to at least understand the consequences, make sure that they have contraception if that's appropriate. You know, again, we don't want to be controlling people, but we do want to make sure they have access to information. And lastly, people who are asleep or in another vulnerable position cannot consent. That should go without saying, right? Okay, consent is never given under pressure. It's not obtained through manipulation and physical violence or threat of physical violence. Lastly, someone in an unbalanced power situation, such as someone under your authority, cannot consent. This is why we talk about relationships in the workplace or high levels of government. For example, you can't give consent if someone has authority and power over you. So that's something that we want to be conscious of too. It's ongoing, which means it must be granted every single time. It must be obtained at every step of intimacy. So, for example, if you agree to do one thing with a person, such as have intercourse, right? Maybe that the other person wants to do something else, but you're not into that. So you want to make sure that that person is okay with that next step, to make sure that they're willing to go further. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And to make a quick addition, somebody asked if consent could be only given verbally. No, consent could be given in any form, verbally, written, in sign language, or through body
Mhm.
language. If that person communicates yes or no in any way, we expect that request in any form. And also, consent can happen at any time, even in the middle of intimacy. If the person
Yeah.
says stop, this is just stop right in there.
Right. Yeah, that's
That's
a
all.
great point. Yeah, thanks, TJ. So let's talk about ways to access services and supports. This is really important. For you know, really, who do we call? Not Ghostbusters, right? That's not really the appropriate use here. We would want to we want to connect with rape crisis centers. And there is a, let's see, yeah. So local rape crisis centers are going to be a hub of services and support that are going to connect you with all the resources that you need to get through this trying time. You might need to connect with law enforcement if that's something you choose. And if you need to or want to, you can access services at the emergency room to receive medical care. So at the hospital, they're going to check for injuries. They're going to do an evidence collection kit. So that's also known as a rape kit, and potentially do some sexually transmitted disease testing and pregnancy testing if that's applicable. The first priority is to create a safe, comfortable environment for you, the survivor, to make sure that you feel supported and have access to services. Just wanting to reference the Sexual Assault Survivors Emergency Treatment Act, also known as SECETA, which guarantees that hospitals are required to provide care to sexual assault survivors and establishes a statewide forensics collection system, creates a reimbursement program and for the cost of care. So basically, you know, if you're accessing services at the hospital, you shouldn't have to pay for that. We never want a survivor of sexual violence to to be fearful of how they're going to pay for this, right? Especially when we talk about poverty and disability and how those things are very interconnected. We know that a lot of folks are struggling financially, and medical care is a huge, huge issue for most people with disabilities. So, again, this is something that's going to help with that. Can victims say no to evidence collection at the hospital? Absolutely. Also, wanting to point out that you can get evidence collection and not submit it, right? So you can kind of like wait on it, you can hold it, is what I think the correct term is. You can make that decision later. We really just want to make sure that we get people where they feel supported, and no decisions have to be made right away. Okay. So here is that number for the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault. They have a 24-hour hotline, and you can receive access to medical advocacy, legal advocacy, and counseling services, which is really great. Okay, let's talk about guardianship. So some of you may have guardians, which is a legal relationship between a person and an entity and an adult who has been determined by a court of law to be unable to make decisions on their own behalf. There are many kinds of guardianship, 3 in particular. Guardians of estate, so that is your property and assets, which is like your money, right? And your property, maybe you have a vehicle or someone left you a house or something, I don't know. Guardians of person and limited guardianship. A guardian's authority is spelled out in a court document and may include authority for medical care decisions, placement decisions, and treatment program decisions. So being a rep payee is not the same as guardianship. And I want to encourage anyone who is disabled on today's webinar to really research this. If you have a guardian, why? Not that you don't want one, but why was that decision made? How does your guardian support you? Kind of understanding more about that, and really wanting to make sure that we all understand that just because you have a guardian does not mean that your guardian can decide if you receive services, if you receive evidence collection at the hospital, if you go to the hospital, if you talk to the police, whether or not they can look at your records from the Rape Crisis Center, right? These are all things that you get to make the decision about, and not your guardian. And so we've done a lot of training with rape crisis centers and medical advocates to make sure that they know and that they can support any person receiving services to make those decisions, okay? Something really awesome that I want to highlight, and the work of Illinois Imagines and other advocacy groups in the last decade, is that now an adult with a guardian can attend up to 12 counseling sessions free of charge without the consent or notice of their guardian, unless the counselor or therapist believes that that's necessary. Sometimes that is necessary. And the guardian's not responsible for the cost of the counseling services. So before, this was not an option. People were not allowed to seek therapy or access services without their consent of their guardian, which is pretty muddy because sometimes guardians are perpetrators, right? Or maybe the guardian knows the perpetrator, although there's all kinds of situations where, the guardian may not always have a clear head and a picture of how we can support an individual. So before we adjourn, I want to talk about some more resources. And first, a project called Envision Illinois, which is similar to Illinois Imagines, which Illinois Imagines was a grant that was specifically focusing on sexual violence for women with disabilities and later included men. But there's also something called Envision, which focuses on domestic violence. Both projects work to transform the service delivery system and update policies, and so that survivors have equal access to healing, safety, and justice, right? So interestingly, this kind of comes out of funding silos where we have organizations through the government that fund sexual violence and domestic violence separately, but we know that these things often intertwine, and that domestic violence, sexual violence is a form of domestic violence, right? And these things often, like I said, go hand in hand. So just wanting to provide some resources for that. You can access that here. Click on that link. And also, Illinois Imagines has some incredible resources. Whether you are a self-advocate, you want to learn more, or you're a staff person or a parent or a guardian, there are lots of resources on the website that you can access. Oh, 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 I clicked on it. Apologies. All right, hold on a second. Let me get back here. Okay, present. There we go. Okay. Apologies for that. A little blip. Like I said, there is a guide for parents and guardians. So if you are a parent or guardian, I encourage you to look at that. Also, we are thinking of potentially hosting another webinar in the new year, specifically for parents and guardians. So if that is something that you feel like you might benefit from, or if someone you know would benefit from, leave us a note in the comments just so we can kind of gauge interest on that. Next, we have a guide for empowerment groups, which is a really cool opportunity and has a lot of lesson plans and materials and handouts that folks might need. And as I referenced before, here is a list of resources that are really cool and really fun to look at. We've got the Illinois Imagines website here. We've got the Department of Human Services sex ed curriculum page. So Illinois Imagines does have a curriculum, but then there are also several other curriculums that have been reviewed and vetted by the state. Next, we have the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance website, Centers for Independent Living, which support people with disabilities around the country. And this is all the centers that we have in Illinois. Next, we have NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Equip for Equality, which is the legal arm in our state that supports people with disabilities, and our educational institution, which is UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, Department on Disability and Human Development. Next, we have Queerability, which is a LGBTQ plus and disability rights organization, because again, that's really important to reference. Some newsletters, impacts on helping DSPs, and then some other resources that you might want to check out. TJ.
Sorry about that, I was muted. Sorry. In addition to the resources that we shared in the previous slides, we'll also get into, I'll get into a couple more as well. Let's say whether you're experiencing sexual and domestic violence, or you're experiencing the stress of navigating your gender identity and sexual identity, and you're in the brink of committing suicide, you could refer to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is posted on the screen, or you may also go to their website, Suicide Prevention Lifeline .com, no, .org, .org. And basically in that lifeline, you could talk to somebody, and they could help you through whatever you're going through, and essentially help you prevent committing suicide. And there's also another way you could cope with those stresses and pains of the things that we mentioned as well. What we call self-care is basically taking care of yourself and coping with stressful situations. There are many types of self-care that you could engage in. There's physical self-care, like eating healthy food or walking, sleeping, or even consensual sex.
Mm. Mhm.
Emotional self-care could look like how to manage your stress or being kind to people through kind acts like giving or listening or helping them out. There's like the social self-care things you can do to take care of yourself, like setting boundaries for yourself and others in relationships, or creating support systems where people could give you counseling, advice, and emotional support. You could look into social media that talks about positive things. There's spiritual self-care where you take care of your spiritual aspects of your life. And it doesn't have to be religious where you go to church or a mosque. It can be as simple as spending time alone or doing some meditation or prayer, doing yoga, or just connecting yourself with nature by walking in the woods or going to the park or the beach. It could be in the form of writing your thoughts in a journal or notebook, or going to a space that is quiet and beautiful and serene that can help you de-stress. Another form of self-care you can do is what we call personal self-care. What are the things that you enjoy to do that could help you take care of yourself? You could do hobbies that you like to do, like riding a bike, playing video games, knitting, whatever you like to do. There's also doing things like reading books or doing surveys or watching things that can help you get to know yourself better or form your personal identity, and just honoring your true self, be true to yourself.
Mhm.
There's self-care in navigating your space, whether it is your personal space or the space around you. So practicing how to be safe to yourself and other people, how to have a living environment that is safe, whether it's cleaning up or making sure that people do not bring anything harmful, such as stressful situations,
Hmm.
addicted drugs and alcohol, things of that nature, or having an organized space where things are not as cluttered. So that's also could be personal to cleaning up, for instance. There's also taking care of yourself financially by saving money or how to budget, how you pay your bills or spend money, how to treat yourself with nice things every once in a while, but not go overboard by spending too much money on things you like to pay money, and also make sure that you pay your bills in a timely fashion if you can, or make sure you pay the bill, period.
Hmm.
And another form of self care is, believe it or not, is work. Work can also be self-care in many forms. For instance, how to manage how much time you spend on work. Do you put in enough time where you focus on one task at a time? Do you do everything at once? Or do you make sure that you have enough time to complete the task before a deadline? There's also setting work boundaries. Do you want people to talk to you while you work, or would you prefer going to a place that is favorable to work at, or making sure that you have breaks in between your work, between times that you work? It's very important. Trust me.
Yeah, thanks. This is so important. Self-care is one of those things that we could all use more of, right? So
Yeah.
as we end here, I know I want to be conscious of time. We've got just 3 minutes, so we're gonna we're gonna skip through this. I want to hear any questions, comments, or considerations from the audience. If you have something that you're dying to ask us, let us know in the chat. And while those questions are coming in, wanting to share about our upcoming webinar. So continuing the journey of mobilizing support for people with disabilities who have experienced sexual violence. This webinar will be on Tuesday, December 15th. And this is the one where everyone's going to come back together and we're going to talk through what we do next. So I've encouraged folks to look at the Illinois Imagines resources and start to think about, look at the assessment, maybe have some of your staff take the assessment, or maybe if you're a person with a disability, what supports are you needing? What are you lacking in your life now, whether it's education or if you receive services and your agency doesn't offer classes, how can we create a bridge and come together, right? And kind of action plan what comes next. We also have additional events that are going to be less kind of me talking. I'm not going to be talking much at all, which is exciting. So we've got a healthy relationships talk on December 3rd. That's going to be really exciting. We have an incredible lineup of panelists. We're going to do a art and trauma recovery event and hear from survivors who have turned their experiences into incredible works of art. And so they will talk about that. Then we'll have a presentation from Kate Caldwell of UIC on disability and bisexuality and healthcare outcomes. And lastly, healthy sexuality and sexual expression panel, which TJ will be leading. And so we're excited for that. So with that, I'm going to leave up my email if you wish to connect with us further. And I'm going to check the chat. All right, lots of praise. Thank you so much for attending. If no one has any other questions, I want to give a huge round of applause and shout out to Timotheus Gordon for his incredible work today. We appreciate you so much, TJ. Thank you for your continued advocacy and work in this field. You're such an asset. So thank you so much. We appreciate you. And thank you to our ASL interpreter, our closed captioner, and just a quick shout out to the Alliance team and Maggie at Resilience, who have made all of these webinars possible. This is our 4th of 9, so we've been working really hard to provide some good content for everyone, and we hope that this has been beneficial to you. And we encourage you to reach out to us and tell us what else you need. If it's certain tips and tricks or more education on a certain topic, if you want to schedule time with us to work through some of this, we are here and ready to meet your needs. So thank you again and have a great day, everyone. All right, bye.